Notice how difficult it is to distinguish between waiting and stillness. In Chinese history, this has been a very big problem for the Chinese. In the West, in the ancient Hermetic tradition, we never had this problem. There was never any question of the distinction between waiting and stillness. We can't go into it now, but it was never an issue. In the full range of Plotinus, in all 54 treatises, you do not find a single treatise devoted to the problem of what stillness is. But in Chinese development, in their philosophic tradition, in their cultural history, they have had a problem with this. And so most of the translations of the Tao Te Ching by Chinese are influenced by a philosophic movement of about 900 years ago called Neo-Confucianism. During the Sung Dynasty. And most of the learned Chinese minds and experience, sensitivity, points of reference, come from a Neo-Confucian basis. And it makes it impossible for them to understand Lao Tzu. They cannot translate Lao Tzu into English or in other language, for they do not read Lao Tzu in the Chinese as Lao Tzu. They read the Tao Te Ching as a compendium. And it makes a great deal of difference. For if you do not understand that the Tao Te Ching is the living language of the presence of a person, you miss out not only on the Tao, but you miss out on the Te. And traditionally, in Neo-Confucian Chinese values, the 5 major elements do not begin with Tao. They do not even begin with Te. They begin with Zhen. And so they have the last 3 of the 5-phase energy cycle. They have Zhen, they have Yi, and they have Li. And then to make up for the missing Tao and Te, they add wisdom, and then they add something else, which we will see. This is not any condition in which you can listen to Lao Tzu, read Lao Tzu, speak his language. And so the Tao Te Ching has languished as a kind of academic antiquarian document whose living influence in China has largely been confined to an esoteric metaphysical interpretation. I don't wish to be derisive, but it's as if one thought that Madame Blavatsky was the ultimate writer in the Western tradition. Rather than someone like Plotinus. Or it's as if Madame Blavatsky's presentation of Tibetan Buddhism was the only one known, and no one knew anything about Milarepa. or Naropa, or the 400 or 500 other geniuses in Tibetan Buddhism who present the tradition in its actuality. So that instead of having Lao Tzu with the Tao Te Ching, instead of having the Tao, you have a metaphysic. To help me redeem myself with the Theosophist, Madame Blavatsky brilliantly called it metaphysically. And so you come up with speculative panoramas instead of the experience of the spirit. It's like watching TV documentaries on travel and never going anywhere. There's a monumental difference. We come tonight to the square at the center of the discussion of Tao. So that in all of the Tao Te Ching, the two legs upon which it walks, the Tao and the Te, we're now at the center of the Tao. And as we saw before, at the center of the Te, with the discussion at that time, you can go back and refer to it. The four chapters that form the square at the center of the discussion of Tao are extremely difficult because they have to be balanced together in a square. And that balance is almost forbidden because of the complexity. Because, in a way, 18 and 19, which are the first pair, tend to go with chapter 17. So that 17, 18, and 19 usually are suggested to be read together. In Hendrick's translation, at the very top of the page, one finds under 17, 18, 19 that 17, 18, 19 should be read together as a single unit. So that 18 and 19 have a quality of almost carrying the previous discussion of Tao into the square without a break. And as if this is not difficult enough, the second pair in that square, chapters 20 and 21, are extremely difficult. It's as if Lao Tzu, now having established his character, his personality, his spiritual language, jumps completely outside of it. Talks almost as an actor who is ad-libbing out of the role. So that one's attentiveness is suddenly shocked, suddenly perked up. What is this? What does he say? Why is he speaking this way? And chapter 20 of the Tao Te Ching is extremely difficult to translate. But as chapter 20 is difficult to translate, chapter 21 is almost impossible to think about accurately. And it is the place where Chinese philosophic history, again and again, has become sidetracked. And unless you can, in your own existential experience, in your own personal existence, make the distinction between waiting and stillness, one misreads. I want to bring this out graphically. Let's start with a translation of chapter 21. Let's work backwards. Instead of working 18, 19, 20, 21, let's go to 21. And let's bring in Wing Sit Chan's translation. How does he translate chapter 21? He has Lao Tzu speak this way. The all-embracing quality of the great virtue, the all-embracing quality of the great virtue follows alone from the Tao. The thing that is called Tao is eluding and vague. Now you can see, if you've been following my translation all the way through, he's getting himself dug into a hole here. He's saying already that the Tao is some elusive thing. And already you get into the metaphysics of thinking of astral planes, of thinking of psychic energy. All of that is irrelevant in Tao. Tao is zero-base. You cannot count it. It is not subtle as a form of materiality at all. It does not occur in time-space. Wing-Tsit Chen goes on. Vague and eluding, there is in it the form. Vague and eluding in it are things. Deep and obscure in it is the essence. The essence is very real. The essence is very real. The Chinese pronunciation of the character for essence, Ching, combined with the Chinese pronunciation of the character for real, Chen, Ching, Chen. Ching, Chen. There is a footnote that Wing-Tsit Chen has at this point. Footnote number, in the comment, he writes, from the philosophical standpoint, this is an extremely important chapter. The sentence, the essence is very real, virtually forms the backbone of Zhou Tun Yi's Tai Chi Tu Shuo. Which centers on the reality of the non-ultimate and the essence of yin and yang. And Zhou's work laid the foundation of the entire Neo-Confucian metaphysics. It is remarkable how two basic Taoist terms were assimilated into Neo-Confucianism and assumed a central position. Of course, Neo-Confucian metaphysics is more directly derived from the Book of Changes, but the concepts of reality in the Book of Changes and in this chapter are strikingly similar. Let's bring this up. Let's look at this. One of the most learned of all the Chinese translators of the Tao Te Ching, Wing-Tsit Chen, was a big professor at Columbia University, which had a big Asian studies program. They trained hundreds of people who are making all these translations and influencing them. And they are completely off track, away from Lao Tzu, the Tao Te Ching, Tao Te. Now you can take a skeptical viewpoint and say, well, who is this person hiding out in Los Angeles who makes all of these startling claims? Let me show you a little pyrotechnics. Let me show you how even at your introductory level, you yourselves can see. Because you're intelligent enough. You've earned the right to see a little evidence, to have a little show and tell. The Western tradition always had demonstration as a part of the wisdom tradition. Pythagoras learned it from the Persians and from the Egyptians, and they learned it from their experience for thousands of years. And the very essence of the Western sense of truth is, can you show us how it works? And Lao Tzu is in this kind of quality. He wants us to be able to have the Tao operative, so that we no longer are a common person, We're no longer just mediocre gen, lost in this world, trying to find ways in which to boost ourselves up into some security, some comfortability vis-a-vis the world. He encourages us to let that go, that we are not going to fall in any kind of way from the grace of the Spirit. We are not here courtesy of the permission of any kind of social protocol. We really are here. Our existence, our emergence into reality, is not contingent upon any metaphysical assessment of whether we have earned it or not, or whether we should be here or not. The basic demonstration is that we are. This Chinese philosopher, Zhou Dengyi, lived about 900 years ago. His particular claim to fame is a diagram about the Tai Chi, about the Taoist symbol. Now, Zhou Dengyi, living in the 900s in southern China, where two provinces, Hunan and Guangxi, come together in the far south. Not quite as far south as Canton, but nearby, 100, 200 miles. A very romantic figure in many ways. His house next to a stream took the name, which he used in his lifetime very frequently, of just Lianxi. The name of the stream became the name of the house, became the name that he used. And he was a romantic kind of a figure in his time. And the Sung dynasty was very prosperous. And his diagram, called the explanation of the diagram of the Supreme Ultimate, abbreviated title Tai Chi Tu. And then they added Shuo, which means the explanation. This is the diagram of the Supreme Ultimate with the explanation, and it only runs for about a page or two in print. If you come to one of the most complete discussions of it, you would come to Volume 2 of this History of Chinese Philosophy, published by Princeton University Press in the early 1950s, translated by Feng Yuan, who later, in his old age, was embarrassed by Mao Zedong, who made him stand in the middle of the Tiananmen Square in Beijing and recant his ignorance, which Feng Yuan, being a good Confucian, did and survived. In Volume 2, on page 434, there's a whole chapter, chapter 11, on Zhou Dengyi. This diagram of the Supreme Ultimate, when presented on the page, looks something like this. The most outstanding form here is that you do not see the Tai Chi. What you see predominantly is this figure at the top, near the top, that has the black and the white in several circles, and it has those separated. And this is the way that in the mind of Zhou Dengyi, he saw yin and yang making up the Supreme Ultimate. He did not see the Tai Chi symbol which we commonly take to understand, and rightly commonly take to understand as the symbol of Tao. In fact, in the West, about 25 years ago, there was a tremendous discussion, not in metaphysical lines, not even in ordinary philosophical lines, but in artistic lines, aesthetic lines, psychological lines. And in a book published by the University of California Press, Rudolf Arnheim, towards a psychology of art, he has a chapter, which is chapter, no number, but on page 222, Perceptual Analysis of a Symbol of Interaction, and you will find the Tai Chi 2 discussed from an artistic and psychological standpoint. The basic understanding that Arnheim, who has a very excellent mind, brings to bear is that the original understanding of that Tai Chi 2 is that yin and yang interact in this kind of a way. They face each other off in a polarity, in a kind of a loggerhead. They confront each other, yang as yang and yin as yin, and then they interchange. And their interchange on that basis comes out in the understanding of the mind of people like Zhou Tunyi and Wing-Tsit Chen, and centuries of misinterpretation of the Tao. This loggerhead of dead opposition gets mechanically distributed in this form, and that is taken to be the dynamic interchange. Now they will see the Tai Chi symbol that we're familiar with, which of course has a whole different aspect to it. They will see this symbol, but they will think in terms of Zhou Tunyi's mechanical distribution of yin and yang. Because the concept of yang has been well formed, and the concept of yin has been well formed, before they are brought into interaction, how else can we be sure what we are talking about, such people think? If we have not defined yang first and defined yin first, how can we then further define their interaction? And when you follow that procedure, you get a mechanical distribution of polarity that seems to be dynamic, but is only a rearrangement of a dead form. It's not the living tissue, much less the non-countable Tao. I hope you can follow this. I hope this is not too abstruse. Lao Tzu says, look, it's abstruse. It is abstruse. But we are of such a nature that we can go where the abstruse occurs. We are also abstruse. We do not have the limitations of not being able to follow the movement of the Tao, because we don't need to reach out for it, forwards or backwards, but to balance ourselves, and the Tao will occur in us in all of its fullness. So when that zero base occurs within me in all of its fullness, I experience an openness that has no dimension. It can be called a void, but that's a rather pathetic way of talking about it. It can be called emptiness, but it's the kind of emptiness that a cup has. It's the useful part of it. It's the openness of a doorway. It's the useful part of it. And so when I experience the Tao, a zero-based, dimensionless presence in my balance, that's the useful part of me. Why? Because that movement of Tao in spirit, Jin, allows for Te to make the symbols which then make this world real. But you have to get the 5-phase energy cycle and not have it reduced down to the 5 elements, which happened a long, long time ago in Chinese history. Now, if we come to a description of Zhou Tenyi's Tai Chi 2, with its explanations, so we have the character Shuo. He writes this: the ultimateness, and yet also the supreme ultimate. So he begins this exposition at the very top, coming down, and he makes a statement that there is an ultimateless, a Wu Chi, and yet also the supreme ultimate, the Tai Chi. And then he writes, the supreme ultimate through movement produces the yang. This movement, having reached its limit, is followed by quiescence, and this quiescence by this quiescence, it produces yin. And you can see in this, if you follow this kind of language, that he has a model that this language speaks from. This is particularly a sexual model of male, female. But his language does not emerge out of stillness. His language is descriptive of a model which has been conceived in the mind. And so one has, in the most derisive sense, a metaphysics. Forget for a moment if you like metaphysics. The original Greek term for physics, physis, does not designate anything static. It means emerging. And meta means above. So in a very precise use of language, metaphysics would mean above emerging, that it doesn't emerge. And it's a paradoxical way of understanding that mental conceptions only are dead as living entities. They are only speculative diagrams. They're only mental pictures. They're dead. Why are they dead? Because they do not occur in the 5-phase energy cycle in the 4th level. In the 4th level, where symbols in the mind would really occur, those symbols in the mind occur in grandfather phasing because Te is full. But in metaphysical speculation, those symbols in the mind come from the human estimate of the interaction of one's self with nature as an object. But nature, the world of the 10,000 things, is in the 5th phase. So in a very odd way, if you put the kind of Neo-Confucian metaphysics into the hand of someone like Lao Tzu, he would say, you put the 3rd phase into confrontation with the 5th phase, and you think that the 4th phase is some kind of synthesis out of that confrontation. And this is completely to misunderstand and to also be ignorant of Tao and Te, and also the real nature of spirit Gen. Because the Gen that you're talking about that could confront the world is not spirit Gen at all, but some kind of ego, as we would say. In our language, a spiritual person doesn't confront the world to make something happen. The kind of person that we see confronting the world to make something happen is egotistical, is someone who is arrogant, who by their challenge is making things happen. Whereas mathematically it can be shown that that kind of activity is merely a very diffuse form of gambling. Challenging the world to make something happen is very much like just throwing dice. Because the probabilities of having any kind of control over what is happening are exactly in dead limbo. If you want to make something happen by challenging the world, the best that you can do is you're going to be dead even after infinity. It would be the same as if you did nothing at all. Which is the same as misunderstanding waiting as stillness. Because Lao Tzu is saying that when the Tao is really here in our spirit gem, whatever it is that we do is full. Our activity is full. It has the resonance, it has the correspondence, it has the taste of Tao in it. Let's finish up with Wingsit Chan's translation. We'll come back to some more of this in a minute. Here's his translation complete. Chapter 21. The all-embracing quality of the great virtue follows alone from the Tao. The thing that is called Tao is eluding and vague. Vague and eluding, there is in it the form. Eluding and vague, in it are things. Deep and obscure, in it is the essence. The essence is very real, in it are evidences. From the time of old until now, its name, manifestations, ever remains, by which we may see the beginning of all things. How do I know that the beginning of all things are so? Through this Tao. I struggled with this translation because chapter 21 is indeed very, very, very difficult. Its title, the two characters that come as the title for 21, have a particular mysteriousness. It has a kind of an alliteration. Shu Shin. Shin means heart. It most definitely means heart. This particular Shu indicates an emptiness. It's not like Wu, as in Wu Wei. But it indicates a heart that has been open to the point of acceptance, so that it isn't like Wu empty, but it's Shu empty. Now, if there's any trace at all of ego, that nuance is experienced as waiting. And waiting always has a hidden expectation. Always. You are always waiting for. You don't even have to put the object there, waiting for something. Waiting is always a waiting for. Which translated into the existential quality of one's sense of life, it's always, what am I living for? That my life is not really going on right now because I don't know what I'm supposed to do, what I should be doing, what I need to do. And so one is in a kind of a hesitation. One is waiting. That's not the shu shin, that's not the empty heart here. So this chapter is about the empty heart which is not waiting. Here's the translation. My translation. Vast tays. Vast tay itself's mode is exactly down. Thus, follow Tao itself's active nature exactly abstruse, exactly elusive. Elusive. Oh, abstruse. Now, Lao Tzu here is using his language in a very beautiful way. He's leading us to experience that his expressiveness is going to be very exacting. And when he comes to the object, he sows his language by doubling back twice. He uses a term abstruse, which we've run across before, and then he completes the stitch by using the term elusive. Then he runs the needle back through elusive and then back to abstruse, as if to say, don't go any further than this. This is not a quandary, this is not a polarity, this is not a paradox, it's not a puzzle. Here is Tao operating in Spirit Gen. And because Tao is operating in Lao Tzu's Spirit Gen, his symbolic language, which the Lao Tzu, the Tao Te Ching is resonant. It's as clear as it gets. It's as exacting as it gets. You say this again. Lao Tzu balances himself out so that his Spirit Gen presences down. When it does, when the first phase of the energy cycle down is exactly correspondent with the third phase, Lao Tzu's Spirit Gen, what flows through him is the current of Te in its seamless oneness. And its correspondence, Te's correspondence, is the book, the Tao Te Ching. So that the Tao Te Ching occurs before Lao Tzu's Spirit Gen, corresponding and balancing Tao. And the Te, that is the current, the amperage that flows because of the correspondence. We're used to thinking in terms of electrical energy, the electromagnetic spectrum that requires polarity. You got to have a positive and negative pole for an amperage to flow. There's no current unless you have a positive and negative pole meeting. And in the connective mode of meeting, the current can flow. Lao Tzu is not talking about electricity, which is why he's not talking about sexuality. He's not talking about the way in which the tension of polarity generates a current. Not at all. He's saying that abstrusely, and by abstruse, he is speaking what we would say logically as contrapositively. Not only the other side of it, but the other side of it upside down. So when Lao Tzu uses the term abstruse, he means to draw a diagonal going both to the reverse and the obverse of the reverse. Because it's the obverse of the reverse that has a particular dynamic relationship with our reality. And when that alignment is made, another kind of amperage happens that is not electromagnetic, but to use 21st century physics, it's magnetoelectric. It's the other way. I'll pause here for just a second, give you just something to, so that you need to have a symbol here. You need to have a discursive image. In electrical magnetic energy, the electrical component of that energy wave is very large and the magnetic component is very small. In a magnetoelectric current, the obverse, the magnetic complement is very large and the electrical is very small. For those of you who have a physics background, Maxwell's equations in the 1890s already show that there are two solutions to all of the equations. But in Victorian times, they just couldn't imagine that the negative solutions could be real. We in the late 20th century realized that mathematically it's just as real as the positive solutions. This universe does not junk the forms of reality simply because they don't fit the social conventions of a particular climate at its time. Or as someone once said in Berkeley in the 60s, God is just not a punker. He loves all of it to be true, if it can be true. The magnetoelectric current has a large magnetic quality to it, and that's why it moves by correspondence, not by tension. It doesn't move by conflict. It moves by resonance. It doesn't move, as someone once said about 30 years ago, going back to the 50s, on a famous record of that day, comic record, the 2,000-year-old man. And he was asked what was the basic mode of transportation in those days, and he said, fear. The Tao does not move by fear, it moves by love. The amperage is there because it belongs in that flow. So that when the Tao belongs with someone, it's there as quickly as magnetoelectric energy moves. How quick is that? It moves 10 billion times faster than the fastest imaginable electromagnetic energy, the speed of light. I don't know what that turns out, 186,000 miles per second times 10 billion. That's how fast it moves. Plenty fast. You can go from this spot 10 billion light years in a single year. So by 1994, you could be at the end of the universe. That's how fast. So the Tao is an energy, but it's an energy of love. It's an energy of correspondence. It's an energy of resonance. Now you can imagine that the Tao moves to be with our spirit gem very, very, very quickly. And because the Tao is not even 1/jillionth of an inch away from us, it moves so quickly as to be almost indistinguishable. Only God could distinguish it from spontaneousness. And so the Chinese Taoist phrase has always been the heavens standard is the Tao, and Tao's standard is the spontaneous. Because for all intents and purposes, on any level of sophistication, it is spontaneous. Now, in my translation, vast Te itself's mode is exactly Tao. Thus, follow Tao itself's active nature exactly abstruse, exactly elusive. Elusive, oh, abstruse. Its inside has forms abstruse. Oh, its inside has beings deep. Oh, obscure. Oh, its inside has spirits very real. Its inside has trust from old until now. Its name not departs, thereby witnesses all reoccurring. I, what thereby can know all reoccurring itself? Such indeed, thereby this. In other words, I wouldn't be able to talk this way now if it weren't true. Because he's doing it right before our experience. Let's stop there. Change the machines. Change our dentures. The Tao Te Ching occupies the fourth phase of an energy cycle. Not only does the Tao Te Ching occupy this fourth phase, any book written from wholeness would. The Torah would occupy the fourth phase. The I Ching would occupy the fourth phase. Homer would occupy the fourth phase. Any book that comes out of the wholeness. What wholeness? The wholeness of spirit gen balancing down such that Te flowing unencumbered through makes that book whole. But the fourth phase is not the conclusion of the energy cycle. There's a fifth phase. What is that fifth phase? That fifth phase is the world. Or as the Chinese say, the 10,000 things. So in every religious understanding, there's such a thing as sacred writings. Why are those writings sacred? Because they bind together our sense of what's right in the world. And yet we know that the books are not like rules and regulations binding the world. They bind the world through a loving comprehension that comes from who wrote the book. The person through whom the writing has come. The scriptures are scripture because they've come through someone who has opened themselves up to, quote, divinity. Through spirit gen, which has opened itself up to Tao. But notice in the ecology, you have to have all five phases working together. It's like the hand. Yeah, you can with a couple of fingers grab things, and with one you can point at things. But really the comprehension is for all five together. That's why the hand is the symbol. It's the universal symbol for our species of wholeness. The Australian Aborigines use it. The Paleolithic cave painters in southern France used it. Everywhere on the planet, wherever Homo sapiens sapiens have been for the last 80 or 90,000 years, the hand has been a symbol of comprehension, which is why I use it. The hand of comprehension for Lao Tzu is the five-phase energy cycle. No. He says time and time again that if we're not in balance, if that five-phase ecology is not smooth, what happens is that there tends to be a kind of a need to make a sixth phase, something beyond the world. Because the world, the fifth phase, does not fold back into Tao. And we feel somehow like it's the world's fault. There's something wrong with the world. So the world has to have something beyond it. A sixth phase, in effect. Although the confused mind of someone doesn't understand that they're trying to fudge and make a sixth phase. Nevertheless, that's what's happening. Lao Tzu says that sixth phase is the illusion. That's the illusion. It's like trying to force the world to make something beyond itself so that you can be saved. What are you trying to make beyond the world? Metaphysics, in the most derisive sense. Speculations, false religions, egotistical philosophies, private universes, private mythologies. And Lao Tzu in the Tao Te Ching constantly is saying, this can be stopped at any time. Because as soon as you balance yourself, as soon as spirit Jen comes into play, the whole compulsive need for something beyond the world vanishes. That illusion blinks out with such a completeness, as the historical Buddha says, it is not then seen to be something that never was, nor could be. And then the following phrase is that the historical Buddha used, what needed to be set up has been set up, and what needed to be torn down has been torn down. And that remains, that's enlightenment. The Chinese word for two characters for what remains is si-jan, self-sowness. Self-sowness. What does remain? The world in its self-sowness, you in your self-sowness, and Tao in its self-sowness. Zero-based, invisible, with you, generating that Te that makes the language possible to be conscious of this whole ecology, so that human beings, Homo sapiens sapiens, can be conscious of their participation. It's like a stream of the spirit that goes through its ecological cycle and includes our consciousness that we are doing. We are now, at this moment in time-space, doing it. But that's eternal. That's spiritual. As different from this kind of Neo-Confucian metaphysics that tinges almost all of the Chinese influenced translations of the Tao Te Ching. Why would it take an American who doesn't have a Chinese particular education background, although it's very difficult to say because I've had more than 25 years. Why should an American be able to sing this? Because the real Taoists are us. In the late 20th century, we're the real Taoists. You almost never find anyone in China who cares anything at all about this, or knows anything about this, or has any experience with this. Almost none. Zero. Why would someone like Master Ni come to Los Angeles? Because there's no one to talk to in China about such things. They don't care. Or if they do care, they care in a kind of a deep cultural, habitual way, rooted in this kind of Confucian quality. Here's my translation for it. Vast Te itself's mode is exactly Tao. Thus, follow Tao itself's active nature exactly abstruse, exactly elusive. Elusive, oh, abstruse. Its inside has forms, abstruse. Oh, boundless. Its inside has beings, deep. Oh, obscure. Oh. Its inside has spirits, very real. Its inside has trust from old until now. Its name not departs, thereby witnesses, all reoccurring. I what thereby can know all reoccurring itself. Such indeed thereby this. Now that is very, very difficult, and yet at the same time, it's the fourth in a square of 4 chapters at the center of the discussion of Tao. What is the first of those 4? Chapter 18, and its title is Cloaking the Vulgar. Cloaking the Vulgar. Here's my translation to save a little time. Great Tao rejected, then having Zhen, righteousness, prudent wisdom appeared, then great hypocrisy. In other words, if you reject Tao, if you live in such a way that Tao does not occur in sync with Spirit Zhen, then whatever is passing as Zhen, righteousness, and prudent wisdom, no matter what it is hypocrisy. You can mean it to the nth degree, it's hypocrisy. You can be convinced someone else has it, it's hypocrisy. It's a very difficult, because there's no way to make the distinction if you don't know. Jesus very often in his language, when he levels the description of hypocrite, he levels it because they, in their arrogance, are saying, we are the ones who make the judgments about God's right, God's purpose, God's laws. We're the ones, we're the priests, we're the high priests, we're the cathedral, we're the teachers. I'm copying the high priests in some future audience. How about it, boys? My ancestors went to southern Illinois during the Revolutionary world and used the same eye that drew a bead on the game in the forest to draw a bead on the surgeon operation of the scalpel. My ancestors were all surgeons. So I have my eye on it. Here's how this translation of the 18th chapter proceeds. Great Tao rejected, then having Zhen, righteousness, prudent wisdom appeared, then great hypocrisy. Six-phased, not wise, then having filial and paternal, country families confused, then diffused, have virtuous officials. Now the Chinese characters that translates as virtuous officials, usually in Chinese literature, in the tradition of Chinese writings, the two characters that are brought together are loyal officials. You can imagine with the millennia of bureaucracy in China that the phrase loyal officials became just cemented hard. But when Lao Tzu uses virtuous officials, he's using a kind of a language which is recognizable as being slightly satirical. He's saying, yeah, those who are claiming this purity are really virtuous officials, aren't they? They're really loyal to this kind of stuff that they're peddling. That's what they want. That's what they're virtuous to. He's saying the diffused have their virtuous officials in times of confusion. In times of confusion, nobody can be really sure whether it's a phantom or a dog bark. So here's the translation, cloaking the vulgar. Great Tao rejected, then having Zhen, righteousness, prudent wisdom appeared, then great hypocrisy. Six-phased, not wise. Now most of the translations are confusion in tone, and they put this down as the six relations. They don't say six phases, they say six relations. Because again, it's a standard kind of Chinese use of these characters together. What are the six relations? The father, the mother, the oldest brother, the youngest brother, the oldest daughter, the youngest daughter. The six major relations. But Lao Tzu, if he were going to be talking about the complete relations, would never, ever have missed the fact that in the Tao there are 8 family relations, because the middle son and the middle daughter, number 7 and number 8, which are not even seen in the Confucian schemata of things. In the Tao, the middle son and the middle daughter, symbolized by water and fire, are the points of exchange at the middle of the continuums of yang and yin. And someone on the level of Lao Tzu would not be speaking about 6 family relations, but very, very likely is speaking about 6 phases, because the compulsive need to make the world give something beyond itself, a 6th phase, so you can be saved by what's beyond the world. You can see that there's a membrance, that there's something needed to correspond to you, and it must be something which the world better give up so I can have it. And that's when you get the tyranny of the egotistical common gen over nature, trying to squeeze nature to give up something which you need. And so you bulldoze down the trees because you think something beyond nature is going to be important to your ego, and that will save you. That's the whole trigger that the people in Rio de Janeiro tonight should have understood, and no one down there is talking real. Because that's what the Earth Summit needs, is to understand what is real. Because until that happens, it's all hypocrisy. And nothing gets done. What happens is that one turns nature into a gagging patient that is trying to vomit up something which it cannot. Because what's beyond nature is the Tao, which it should flow back into, not some sixth phase that we think is our salvation. Hacking with an axe at a tree so that it will deliver up something beyond itself, which then will save us, is idolatry in the worst possible way. I don't know if you can follow that, but it's on tape. Chapter 19. That's 18. We've had 21. So we've had this diagonal. Now, chapter 19. Here's my translation. I'm trying to save time. Some of these other translations are just almost impossible. They are impossible. It's not that in an academic way you can't make those kinds of translations out of this kind of text. You can, but it doesn't say what Lao Tzu says. It isn't the Tao Te Ching of Lao Tzu. It's homey fortune cookie aphorisms with a kind of Neo-Confucian gravy. That's not it. Nobody wants to live on that. That's not a good diet. That doesn't nourish anything. Whereas Lao Tzu nourishes from inside out into infinity. This is a treasure of the world. It's something to hold like a talisman of wholeness, because once you can understand anything like this, on this level of completeness, you can understand anything. Once you understand the Tao Te Ching completely in this way, then you can look at the Torah. Then you can look at Homer. Then you can look at the Gathas. And then you can listen not to some professor so-and-so, some commentator, but you can listen to Zoroaster, you can listen to Moses. You can listen to Jesus. You can hear the great teachers teach from themselves in their original language. Here's chapter 19. Lao Tzu just finished talking about cloaking the vulgar, now is using his language to show you that even good, beautiful things, only in their name, need to be dispersed with. Abandon, quote, sageliness. Let go, quote, prudence. The people benefit 100 times. Abandon, quote, Jen. Let go, quote, righteousness. The people return to filial parental. Abandon, quote, skill. Let go, quote, gain. Thieves, robbers never appear. Never even appear. It's not that crime is solved, it's that it doesn't even happen. The power of the Tao is exponentially real. It doesn't solve social problems. They don't even occur. It's a scale of the real that would boggle the minds of politicians if they could even presence it. For one thing, its immediate effect on the worldly personality is to produce a kind of a shattered, humble silence that comes out dribbling like confusion. Well, I'm sorry, I just didn't understand. Lao Tzu says, these three things. What three things? Abandon sageliness. Not abandon sageliness, abandon, quote, sageliness. Let go, quote, prudence. How can we understand this? Let go of, quote, prudence. a French existential writer, Maurice Merleau-Ponty, who did a lot of work during the Second World War trying to understand the psychology of political terror. He had a lot of experience working with it. He said, when you ask the moral question in terms of the German idealist philosopher Immanuel Kant, you use a thing called the categorical imperative, which simply is, before you do any action, you have to ask, what if everybody did this? And usually when you ask about any action on the basis of what if everybody did this, you end up not doing most things. Everybody ends up getting in line, in conformity, which is what the Nazi political program wanted. I forget the German word for it. It means conformity. Then that's supposed to be good. It's based logically on this categorical imperative, Maurice Merleau-Ponty said. Whereas, completely different from that, not only opposite, but contrapositively different from that, one asks the existential imperative. If I don't do this action, what if nobody does it? And very frequently, the existential answer that one comes up with, if nobody did this, the universe would be minus this value. So I will add this value to enrich the universe because this is a gift from me. And so very often the existential imperative frees a human being to be exactly who they are. And that enriches all of our lives. That is the basis, Merleau-Ponty says, that we have to combat political and personal terror. By opening up the rare, unique freedoms of whoever it is that you are. To air out in the sun of infinity all of the beautiful possibilities of human beings. Because on that basis of opening up and opening out, very few people continue to do something which really hurts someone else. Very, very few. Lao Tzu says, abandon, quote, sageliness. Let go, quote, prudence. The categorical imperative. The people benefit 100 times. Abandon, quote, gen. Let go, quote, righteousness. The people return to filial parental. Abandon, quote, skill. Let go, quote, gain. Thieves, robbers never appear. These three things thereby. A busy language not sufficient. Therefore, let them have that upon which they rely. Don't just give them beautiful phrases, political slogans. Let them have in their lives what really those phrases rely upon. What is the correspondent? What is the referent of those phrases? This. Recognize simplicity. Embrace the primordial. Lessen ego by diminishing desires. It is really simple. And then, as a kind of a coda, Lao Tzu puts another line, which in almost all the translations was put into chapter 20, but in the Ma Wang Tui manuscripts of 2,300 years ago, we can see that it belongs at the end of chapter 19. The coda is, abandon, quote, learnedness without anxiety. Don't feel guilty at all about not pursuing even one more second, quote, learnedness. There's a lot to educate yourself about, but you don't even have to worry 1 second longer about, quote, learning it. Okay, that's chapter 19. What is chapter 20? Distinguish the vulgar. Now look, we've had chapter 18, cloaking the vulgar. So chapter 20, distinguish the vulgar, jibes with it. Every other chapter in the Lao Tzu has a kind of a correspondent siblingness. So that chapter 21, empty heart, goes along with chapter 19, and the characters are just not translatable. I mean, they are translatable. If you look at the way that D.T. Suzuki translated it, it isn't right. He called chapter 19 returning to purity, and it's not that at all. Huan Sheng. Now, Sheng is similar to Shan. Shan is like mountain, or variants of it are like aspiration. So the sense of purity is like that, not the purity that you would get normally by just carving away and taking impurities out. But this is that kind of a purity that when it is only of itself it rises. It's like aspiration. It's like consciousness is a spiritual form of energy because it rises. You can symbolize consciousness by an arrow, and frequently it's been done. Why an arrow? Because consciousness as a form, as an energy form, rises. It's not even that it goes up so much as that it has a risingness to it. I'm trying to say something here, it's very difficult. It isn't, it's like in the space program, someone who really understands it says, we're not trying to go up, we're trying to go out. That the whole name of this phase of evolution is outward bound. We're not trying to get holier than thou by going up above the earth. We're not wasting earthly money on just sending a few people up above. We're taking the whole species outward. That's what's going on here in this. Lao Tzu is saying, let's do this outwardness. Do the outwardness. That's how I would translate it. Not a very good translation, but that's what I would translate it. Now, chapter 20, coming after that, after 18 and 19, and just before 21. 21's the fourth in the square, 18's the first, 19's the second, so that the third, chapter 20, is Lao Tzu letting it all out. Letting it just come out. And so it's very difficult to translate because it tends to color outside any kind of literary form. The Chinese have a very particular phrase for this. It's the phrase for very high literature. And the phrase translated in English means the literary carving of dragons. Mm. And what he's doing in chapter 20 is he's letting loose the dragon in his language. And so this is how it translates and how it reads, and I'll just end tonight because it's Lao Tzu at his torrential waterfall most openness. The yes itself contrasts the yea. Mutually different, how little. Beautiful itself contrast, ugly, mutually different, how much? Jen itself, which fears, not can not fear. Desolation, oh, not yet tethered indeed. All Jen, joyful, joyful, as if celebrating a great feast, as if spring climbing a terrace. I alone, oh, one not yet almond, an infant itself not yet smiled, forlorn, forlorn, oh, like nothing place returning. All Jen have plenty, yet I alone, like a wanting. I, foolish Jen itself, heart indeed, ignorant, ignorant, oh. Common Jen, bright, bright, I alone like dull. Common Jen, smart, smart, I alone confused, confused, desolate. Oh, like on an ocean adrift. Oh, like not having a place to anchor. All Jen have righteousness, yet I alone awkward, also rustic. I alone distinguished from Jen. Yet I prize seeking my food from the mother. So that's it. That's all I got tonight.